Hey everyone, welcome. We'll get started in just a couple minutes.
Hi, Dr. Nichols.
Hello, Anya.
Something tells me you know each other.
Yeah, she might have been in a class of mine recently, so.
I do agree, we need some background music. Just gonna admit a few more people and we'll get started. All right, so the admissions have stopped rolling in. It is noon, so we will go ahead and get started. Welcome to this virtual edition of the FMSEA 2020 conference, Biting into Ocean Education. My name is Katie Murray, and I am somewhat between president and past president of FMSEA as of today. So thank you so much for joining us. For those of you who don't know, this is not how we normally do our FMSEA conferences, and we are not Zoom professionals. We were troubleshooting down to the last minute here today. So thank you for bearing with us as we potentially run into some hiccups. This presentation will be about 40-45 minutes to an hour. If you've been to some of these sessions before, you know that it's usually a presenter and then we have time for Q&A. This is going to be a little bit different. I'll let our presenter, Dr. Nichols, explain a little bit why, but due to the nature of this presentation, we want to get a conversation going. So if we see you in the chat box writing in any questions, we may ask you to unmute yourself and kind of get a bit of a conversation going. So right now, I am pleased to introduce our presenter, Dr. Bryan Nichols, who is an assistant professor at the Florida Atlantic University. You can tell by his lovely shirt there. And I'll let him speak a little bit more to what he does. So welcome, Bryan. You can introduce yourself and feel free to start sharing your screen when you're ready.
Okay, thanks. And I don't, the way it's set up here, I don't actually see the chat, Katie, so I'll rely on you to alert me to any of that. Okay, hi everyone. For those of you that do not know me, I am indeed Bryan Nichols, and I do indeed work at Florida Atlantic University. I teach science and environmental education there, including pre-service science to elementary teachers and the master's courses in environmental education. I also coordinate all the environmental ed programs at FAU. And my background is marine science, behavioral ecology of wildlife in particular, and I have worked with a wide variety of critters over the years, in addition to doing a lot of teaching. From British Columbia to Belize, I like to say. And my research and education focuses on pedagogy, science and environmental ed, but also the moral and ethical implications of education and how we do it and how we deal with wildlife and animals and all that. So that is my background. And maybe if you could just put into the chat your affiliations or where you work or that kind of thing, just so we have an idea of where everybody is coming from on this. So where you teach, if you teach, or where you work, they may be the same places. So again, I can't see the chat, Katie. So if they're doing that, that's good. It's all well. Okay, and then what are we doing here? So I just want to provide a little context for this. What I'm doing is designing a graduate level marine pedagogy course. So this is a how to teach course that focuses on marine science and marine themes. Specifically, modern, where we're sort of accelerating into a whole new world, and what do we need to do better or differently or whatever as far as teaching marine science and marine topics effectively in this new era. This will be part of a graduate certificate of environmental education. It'll be part of, or it'll be an elective potentially for master's students, but it'll also just be available as well for anyone who's interested in teaching. And I know a lot of us started through marine science and our background is marine science, and so we haven't necessarily got much in the way of teaching, formal teaching education. And so this would be an attempt to kind of fill in that gap for marine science. I was going to say marine science nerds, but I shouldn't say that, of course. We are marine science enthusiasts and experts. So the second part of what we're doing here is I use a framework when I'm teaching science education and environmental education. And I want to kind of adapt this framework to, again, specifically look at marine science education or marine environmental education. And so I kind of want to look at maybe what's different or important about these frameworks and how they work. So here's just the general framework, and we'll go over it in a little bit more detail as we go through. But basically, when I teach, I say, if you want to be great, if you want to be a great science educator or a great environmental educator, not just adequate, but great, then you have to attend to these 7 different things. And of course, those 7 different things all open up and expand into lots of little subcomponents and all that. But that's basically how I frame my courses. And then finally, of course, I want to share. This was originally set up in a way that we could exchange information and tips, and I could learn as I'm designing this course from FMSEA. And so obviously that's a little bit more challenging now, but there's a ton of expertise in FMSEA, obviously. And I would like to tap into that when I'm designing this course so it becomes a better course. And I chose this graphic just because this shows the worst of both worlds, where not only are they not physically distancing, but they're also all on their computers and not really. So yeah, we'll deal with this compromise as it is. And again, this was meant to be interactive. So I do encourage, it's a little challenging to deal with questions throughout one of these unless it's just a handful of people. But there is a survey, or I'll give you a link to a survey that just basically asks some questions about what should I include, what should I not, what was emphasized. It gives you a chance to express what you feel is important about this. So you will have a venue to do that as well. A quick word, if you're not familiar with these wonderful terms, we have and will use them. Pedagogy is just a fancy way of saying how to teach, or teaching about teaching. The Anthropocene, as I like to pronounce it, is just this new era that we are entering, depending on who you ask, that basically says we're having such a huge impact on the world that it's changing the world. We are changing the world. How do we deal with that? The changes are happening much faster than they have in the past. And PCK is pedagogical content knowledge, which we'll talk about in a little bit as a sort of special sauce for becoming a great educator in a certain topic. All right, and again, this is a brave new decade. It's 2020, so it's an interesting start to a decade when we have this global pandemic like we haven't seen for 100 years or whatever. But of course, for us in marine science, this is a blip in an ongoing upheaval that is climate change, and dealing with climate change and all of the impacts that that's having and will continue to have on the oceans and the world. So obviously the status quo in education has not exactly been capable of dealing with these challenges as well as we might like. And so I want the idea of this to be looking forward looking. We're thinking what could be, what should be in education, as well as what is and what was, to a lesser degree what was, certainly what is right now, but also what could we be doing in an ideal world, or at least a more ideal world. How could we be teaching this stuff more effectively? So that's kind of a focus for this pedagogy course as well. Okay, so I also want to point out a couple important is and isn'ts about what this course is going to do or not going to do. First of all, this is very definitely not a content course for teachers that are interested in marine science. Like many universities, Florida Atlantic University has lots of content courses in specific subject areas that are taught by professors, all kinds of people that are just very knowledgeable in their field. So if you want to learn content, there's lots of different avenues to learn specific marine science content. This isn't that. What this is a pedagogy course. It's a how to teach course that focuses on people who are passionate about marine science and want to teach it more effectively. So it's not a content course, it's a pedagogy course. It isn't focused entirely on science education. My background is science education, and the courses I design are based in science education, but the nature of this beast is not just science education. So think of it more science education with a socio-environmental theme. In other words, there's lots more to know about and to learn about when you're teaching this stuff than just the science focus. And there's lots of environmental and political and policy and other issues that come into play, as most of us know. And so that'll be incorporated into the pedagogy of this course as well. That brings us to this idea of, okay, that's great. You're going to make a 3-credit course on all this. Well, what is essential to include? What do marine science educators, marine educators really need to know or understand or be able to do? Like if you're talking about what makes a great marine science educator, what needs to be in this course? And so this is a good moment to, again, in the chat, maybe just in nice short phrases, throw some stuff out there. What should be in a course like this? Why, what would you include? What do you think in short sentences is worth putting in? And we'll just pop some of those out. See if I can see the chat. Not easily.
I'm seeing tips for dynamic teaching styles and objective engagement.
Okay. We may see some more. And we'll talk about this, obviously, and you'll have a chance to expand upon what you think is essential if you go to that survey at the end. And some ideas and what other people have, included in courses that are somewhat similar to this are these kinds of things: dispositions, skills, practical stuff, learning theories. How do people even learn? Content obviously plays a role in understanding all these in context, but all of this kind of stuff could be part of a course like this. And when you're designing a course like this, one of the tricky parts is it's pretty easy to get people to agree to add things. It becomes much more challenging when you have to remove things or focus or take stuff out. And so when you're designing a course that's skills-based, where you don't learn a skill just by, quickly hearing about it or quickly seeing it, you have to sort of practice. You have to do it again and again in different contexts. So if you're talking about a skill like teaching, it's more important often to practice things rather than just cover a whole bunch of different stuff. And so putting together a course like this, you have to do a lot of slicing and dicing. You have to remove everything that isn't necessarily essential to how to be a great educator in this context. So that's part of what I'll be doing too, and part of what I'm hoping for input on from FMSEA. Okay. So let's just kind of bounce to the 2 frameworks. You can see here on the left is science educators and on the right is environmental educators. They're very similar. The way I teach, the differences are highlighted or bolded, I guess, on the right. But just to run through it, if you're teaching science or environmental ed, you got to know some stuff about that, right? So if you're teaching science, you have to understand science, how it works, all that kind of stuff. And if you're teaching environmental ed, you need to know something about the earth. You have to have some sort of environmental literacy. involved. In both cases, you need content knowledge, whatever the specific content you're teaching is. Obviously, you have to know it, but you also have to know how to teach. You have to have some sort of basic grounding in how to teach, because we've all, especially those of us that went through in science, we've all had professors or experts or volunteers who are very good at number two, the content knowledge, but still struggle to get it across because they don't have the pedagogical expertise. And so both of those things are critical. And then number four, PCK or pedagogical content knowledge can seem like it's repetitive, right? It's redundant. Wait, it's just both of those early things, but it's more than that. And PCK, as we'll get into, is understanding the best way to teach a certain subject to a certain audience. So it's very, very contextual. You could be an expert at marine chemistry, and you could be really good at teaching Marine Chem 100 to college students. But that doesn't mean you have good PCK to then teach that same topic to third graders, because it's a whole different world. And so PCK is kind of like the specifics of the first two, the first three. Of course, you need management skills, and as anyone who has ended up in middle school knows, this is actually really important. If you can't manage teenagers, if you can't manage a classroom or a bunch of learners that you're guiding around, then all the other stuff kind of falls by the wayside, because you're just too caught up in dealing with management problems. Connecting to learners is really, really important, and actually helps you a lot with the previous one, management, but you have to find ways to connect yourself and the material to learners if you want to be really good at teaching it. And then, of course, in both cases, these things change, right? So you need to be a good learner yourself, and you need to be keeping up with all the latest on what's happening. So if you can manage these 7 areas and their subcomponents, you're on your way to becoming a great educator in these fields. And that's kind of the idea that I'm bringing to this marine pedagogy course. So what would it look like if we were to say, actually, let's focus specifically on marine educators now? How would these 7 things be different, or what would be different about them? And obviously, you need ocean literacy at this point as your sort of primary background, but otherwise things are pretty similar on how you manage groups. And when you're doing a pedagogy course like this, these bolded things are the things that would stand out. These are the ones that you would need to be including in your course. Pedagogical expertise, PCK, groups management. And the first one I actually struggle with quite a bit of how much to include is this idea of ocean literacy. So let's bounce to the ocean literacy right near the beginning here. And this idea that as marine educators, you've probably bumped into the ocean literacy principles and that. But when you're thinking about it in terms of a pedagogy course, what is critical here? What does every single marine educator, no matter who they teach, what do they need to know? And that is what I'm getting at in this area right here. So it doesn't matter if you're teaching college students or seniors or grade 1 or whatever, what aspects of ocean literacy are critical for you to know all the way across. And so this has been weighed in on, and this model that you see is, they call it essential principles and fundamental concepts. So obviously somebody thought that these were critical to everybody, but this is worth rethinking again in a pedagogy course, is how much time do you spend on this kind of stuff? Because, the more time you spend on this essential and fundamental stuff, the less time you have for the pedagogy part. And so this is something I would like input on for those of you that deal with these topics with varying audiences, is, how much time would you spend here? What would you emphasize, given that your audience could be teaching all kinds of different ages and groups and that kind of thing? And also a good point to say, is there any questions related to that, Katie?
Not seeing any questions.
Okay. So again, if you have a question related to any one slide, feel free to bounce it into the chat and I can pause to deal. But that moves us to the pedagogical part. So pedagogical expertise is this idea that, yes, I know some stuff about content, but this is knowing some stuff about how to teach, right? And so typically when you take pedagogy courses at a university, you might learn things like this, learning theories. There's various learning theories out there about how our brains, learn basically. And you often get the basics or the old school stuff. What's interesting about a lot of this work now is because of recent advancements in brain scanning and that kind of thing, we're actually learning a lot in the last 5 to 10 years about learning. And so there's some really useful stuff to know if you're an educator that is being discovered in cognitive science right now. And so getting at some of these learning theories, not so much the older, stodgier ones, but the new stuff that's coming out in cognitive science can be pretty helpful for educators. And then various other ways that, it's just the very basics of learning theory. When you're dealing with science ed, understanding inquiry science and how to teach using inquiry is obviously very important. All educators need to be good communicators across various fields. We all of a sudden have to be good online communicators, which is a new skill for many of us. But communication is, obviously really important and an important part of pedagogy. Lesson planning, most of us do use other people's lessons, but we adapt, and we're also often asked to create our own or at least adapt our own. So lesson planning is one of those things that seems like it might be easy until you do it, and then you realize that your great lesson isn't so great after all, and there's a lot more going on. So the structure of how to do a good curriculum, how to design a good curriculum, how to make a good lesson, and what goes into it, that's an important part of pedagogical expertise as well. That would be an important part of this particular course. And then, of course, assessment. And assessment isn't just for school teachers and accountability and all that kind of stuff. Assessment is also for, am I actually teaching what I think I'm teaching? That's really important to know. And a lot of us, especially on the environmental ed side, we don't do a very good job of that. We kind of teach and hope for the best, or teach and then ask things like, how much did you enjoy this program, or that kind of stuff that doesn't really get at, are they learning what we think they're learning or what we hope they're learning? And so assessment is a really important part of teaching that often gets, well, we don't get taught how to assess. We usually just base it on how we were assessed when we went through our, science degrees, which isn't that helpful because most of us just took a midterm and a final, right? And that's kind of the only or the main sources of assessment we got. Okay, as I mentioned, pedagogical content knowledge is the more specific stuff. I like to think of it as the special sauce that makes a good educator great. And again, it's how to teach, how to best teach specific topics to specific audiences. So this is not something that you can exhaustively cover in any course. There's way too much, and it's way too different. Well, a lot of it is way too different. So one of the things you need to do in a more general pedagogy course like the one I'm designing is say, okay, this is what PCK is, and here's how you can get it when you end up wherever you end up teaching, because you're going to have to learn a lot of it on the job or as you go, because it's so specific. And you can give key examples, of course, but it is one of those things that you accumulate as an educator. And that's one of the things that makes us better and better, hopefully makes us better and better as we go, is you're accumulating pedagogical content knowledge, and then you can use that more effectively. To give you an idea of some of the things that would cover, it's looking at things obviously like strategies. What teaching strategies do you use, and what are the most effective strategies, again, for a certain content in a certain learner? You'll notice, and I want to sort of point out, that I'm not including learning styles in any way, shape, or form in this. I'm talking about teaching strategies. The evidence on using learning styles to improve your teaching is thin to none at best, But that doesn't mean that teaching lots of different ways isn't more effective. And so just trying to match the best teaching strategies to the content and the audience is really, really important. And learning different ways you can do that is a big part of PCK. Obviously, if you're teaching outdoors, you need to consider environmental factors and how they affect your teaching. A really important aspect of science education is understanding misconceptions, especially the common misconceptions about the topics that you're teaching. There's lots of ways that learning misconceptions and then using your knowledge of those misconceptions to help you teach that topic is really, really effective. And so if you're not already doing this, this is something you should definitely do. Just like whatever you're teaching next, Google misconceptions related to that topic and figure out what the common ones are. And you can use that knowledge to really improve how you teach. Really good part of PCK. Another part is connection. How do I connect this information to my learners, right? How does it connect to other things they're learning? How does it connect to their lives? How does it connect to their emotions? How does it connect to the broader worlds? People that are more effective educators are good at making those connections for their students because that engages the students much more. And so figuring out good ways to make connections and bring those connections in is a really important aspect of PCK as well. And of course, safety. When you're doing science labs or when you're outdoors and doing science activities or environmental activities, there's all kinds of relevant safety concerns that are specific to both your audience. You know, what you do with fourth graders is occasionally different from what you do with seniors, and the topics and the environments and all that kind of stuff. And another part of PCK is just knowing what those best assessments are. What is the best way to assess this new topic that I just taught? And so all of that is wrapped up in PCK. And all this stuff is a lot, right? Especially when you consider different audiences and different topics. So again, I just want to emphasize that it's not something you can pack into a course, an overall look at what all the PCK is. It's something that you can guide students towards and then help them learn on their own once they end up in their own teaching contexts. When you look at specific strategies, especially, some of the stuff we often learn or we learn from mentors in education if we don't go through formal education programs. But this is the sort of thing that you would include in a pedagogy course. Again, inquiry learning, 5E lessons that are very popular in science and have been shown to be very effective in lots of different contexts. All the project-based learning, problem-based learning, place-based learning, service learning, all kinds of different techniques that you can use. Understanding what models are in science education and how you can use them, how you can use external models to help students build their own internal models of how the world works. That's a really important aspect of teaching science. Differentiating. When you get groups at different levels, different reading levels, different comprehension levels, different language levels, all kinds of different levels, differentiating your instruction to respond is really important. And anyone who's worked with like homeschool groups, for example, knows that you can have a group that is all over the map as far as what their understandings are, and you have to teach in a way that keeps everybody interested and engaged and hopefully learning. Culturally responsive teaching is obviously important, and that's something that you can pick up and learn, hopefully learn contextually if you put the effort in. And then of course, standards. Many of us that work with school groups in various ways or work in classrooms have to deal with educational standards, and there's ways to get the most out of that, ways that they can drive you crazy as well. So all of these kinds of strategies are important for a pedagogy course and would be involved in this kind of marine pedagogy course. And then since some of this stuff is the funnest stuff for those of us that are outdoorsy and adventure-y and all that kind of stuff, I just wanted to mention, and I haven't worked this out yet, right? Because when you work for a major university and start talking about this stuff, you get a stack of paperwork this big and eyes glaze over and liability comes in and all that kind of thing. But obviously, these are very engaging ways to teach marine science. We know that. And so when you do a pedagogy course, somehow introducing these kind of possibilities, how to deal with them, I want to build it in. It's just very challenging to do paperwork wise, for sure. And kudos if you look at this list and you can say, yes, I've done all those things and I've used them to help others learn stuff. So that's a pretty good list. I even did the surface supply there. When I worked in Belize, I did the SNUBA thing. It was interesting for sure, but like 2 people at a time, low reward. All right, and then finally, this idea of groups management is important. Often when people come out of education programs, one of the things that they say they wish they had have done more was learn more about groups management, because it becomes one of their biggest challenges. And so building it in to the course would be important. And it's a hard practice. It's a hard thing to practice in a university context. But again, you can set up learning. You can set up, here's how you would do this, depending on who you ended up having to manage and in what conditions. So all of these things are important parts of group management, including things, as I said before, like differing abilities, cultural diversity, non-native speakers, group work. But groups isn't just managing your learners too, it's also managing your colleagues, it's managing administrators, it's managing parents and community members. You have to manage a lot of things as an educator besides just the actual people you're deliberately dealing with. And so these would all be built in as well as part of groups management. All right, that's all the good stuff. Of course, as educators, we all have to deal with a variety of challenges. And as marine science educators, this course would try to pull the ones that are most relevant when you're teaching about marine science or using marine science for your context. Again, some of these are common across contexts, but anytime you get near the water, risk management changes dramatically for kids in particular. We have to deal with facilities and beach access and who owns what and where we're allowed to do what. That can be a real problem. Of course, materials is an issue. We all want, the 12-person covered boat that we can take kids out on, but that's not always easy to get and keep running. Curricula, and of course weather, bugs are my biggest problem, frankly, as an educator in Florida, but there are lots of other aspects to that. So we all have to deal with challenges. This is a course that's trying to make educators better, so you can't ignore the challenges, right? Those are the things that are going to be often stressful and problematic for a lot of educators. I just want to mention interpretation. For those of you that are thinking, don't make me go all NAI on your ASS, this is an important aspect as well. But to me, the interpretation aspect is kind of a mix. It more depends on where you're coming from. If you're coming from the education side, you're usually dealing with educational goals. And if you're coming from a resource or you're at a nature center or something like that, you're coming with this idea that we want to help people understand or connect to this resource. But you tend to end up in a lot of the same areas where you're trying to make your learners or your participants understand these things better and feel more connected to them in various ways. And so we tend to end up in the middle, and a lot of this course would be focused on that middle ground. So it would be useful for people that are educators and interpreters, depending on the direction they're coming from. There is enough overlap there for sure. Okay, I want to just shout out that the area that I'm in, I'm actually based in Jupiter, and FAU, of course, is Palm Beach County, but there is a lot of really, really good marine education going on here. So this is a good area to run a course like this because there's so much local expertise that you can call upon. And you can see just on this list and this map all the different, and this is just kind of what popped into my head when I was throwing it together too. I'm sure there's more as well. So there's lots and lots of good resources in this area where the course would be. But as we have seen, the world is changing and the education world is changing, and you're not so limited to your local area as you used to be. So I would also be interested in connecting with people in other parts of Florida and even other parts of the world if they're interested in contributing to a course like this. And if you are interested in contributing to this particular course, you can use my email and you can get onto that survey and all that kind of stuff. But it's not just Southeast Florida, obviously. There's lots of good expertise all over FMSEA and indeed all over the world. And I've taught marine science in cold water in British Columbia and the tropics in Belize, and I know that different stuff works in different areas. And so I'm looking for input from all over and a range of perspectives from all over. I forgot to mention too on my challenges, for those of you that are thinking about your own challenges, because it's inevitable. I have been stung by a stingray. It's not fun. I don't recommend it. I was with a group of kayaks and we were trying to outrun a storm and watched as a water spout wiped out the kayak right in front of me. That was pretty exciting. So there are lots of challenges that we face as marine educators. It makes the job more interesting for sure. Okay, so again, this is something that you can get involved with if you're interested. There is Florida Atlantic will offer this course and already has programs environmental ed. So if you want, you can plug directly in to those. Just Google FAU environmental ed and these various things will come up. But more importantly, because FMSEA has such a large base of interest and experience and wisdom and all this kind of thing, I would very much like you to provide your 2 cents worth on this. So what I have done is kind of created a short, with some long answers if you like to wax poetic, but a relatively short survey on this stuff. And I guess, Katie, can you put it in the chat so they can easily grab and so I think both of these links go to the same place. One's just shorter and more convenient than the other. It's just a Google form or Google form. So over the next week or whatever, if you're interested, please feel free to wax poetic. And there's lots of stuff, like you could say, man, I can't believe you didn't talk about this. This is critical. Or, you really didn't address this as well as you should have. Or there's no way this should be part of it. Take that out, or all that kind of stuff, right? So feel free to put in your $2 worth, and it will be much appreciated. And I can get in touch with anyone who's also interested in, contributing to the specific course itself as we go too. So again, this was designed to be interactive, and so it's a little harder, a little more challenging to do it this way. Let me see if I can just kind of go back to the blob then. Yes, and so we can move into questions and answers type setup now, I think, if people have any.
Couple down if you want to answer a couple while you're looking through.
Yeah.
One that was asked a few times is, are these courses available online?
At this point, you can take almost the entire degree and most of the certificate online. I have been reluctant to put it fully online because then I think you lose the context, the local context. And so there's you would have to take at this point, at least 1 or 2 courses in the area, but they might only be once a week or once every other week or even once a month. And so depending on where you are, commuting could be very doable. In that case, you can come to Jupiter and dive with sharks or something or other, and also do your class day or something like that. So there's flexibility. We're under, as university educators, we are under constant pressure to put stuff online, and I have been reluctantly doing some of that, but of course the whole pandemic thing has dramatically accelerated that process. So all I can say is right now, not all of it, but most of it is doable online or in person if you prefer. But you would have to come here for, a couple of times. Anything else?
We did have just kind of a general question about, are you willing to share your PowerPoint presentation today?
Yes, and I can, how do we do that? Upload it or something? Have you guys been doing that?
We haven't done it with any of the PowerPoints themselves. This video will be uploaded, but if you are interested in receiving the PowerPoint document itself, if you want to just write your email address in the chat box here, we'll kind of call down and shoot an email out.
Yeah, that'll work. And I can condense it or whatever to make it not a huge email or something like that if it is. So that's fine.
So those are all of the questions that have come in so far, but feel free to keep asking away.
Yes, you can ask questions about anywhere along the way as well, because this stuff is obviously challenging, right? To figure out how to take a diverse group of educators and say, what's a course that'll speak to all of them, that'll be valuable to all of them is a tricky thing to do, but that's the goal. And that's why I decided on this presentation as well, right? It's not the sort of thing you want to do alone. You want to try to pull in as much expertise as possible. And Florida's lucky. We have a lot of great marine science educators, almost as many as, Iowa. So it's pretty useful.
Dr. Nichols, I have a question. As far as like the timeline for the class goes, is it looking like it may be sooner or later as far as being offered to students?
I was planning on offering it just after you graduated, actually, so you would not be able to take it. But no, I don't know a good time for that. It's I want to say next year. And one of the things we run into is to get a new course officially loaded up, you have to go all the way up to you have to deal with Tallahassee, but you can teach it as a special topics a couple of times before they then require you to register it. So it's possible, Anya, that it could be a special topics before then. So,
I mean, I'm not really planning on graduating like that soon because I can only take one class at a time. So you're stuck with me for a little longer.
Yeah, you'll be able to take it.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else?
For the course yet? Someone is asking.
What's that?
Do you have a name of the course yet?
No. If you have a great name suggestion, shoot that in the survey or the text box too, right? So it'll probably be something not so exciting like marine pedagogy or something like that. Those words will probably be involved, but no, I don't have a name yet. I don't want it to be too cute because then they can like not approve it in Tallahassee or something or other. So you do have to be careful. Okay, I can see chat now. Dive into marine pedagogy. Nice. Yes. The new requirements with COVID, hopefully I won't have to deal with too much, but one of the ways we are all dealing with that is just reducing face-to-face. As I said, I don't like to eliminate face-to-face. And maybe we should start calling it something besides face-to-face because that sounds a little too close, right? You can be in a room talking or whatever, not necessarily be face-to-face. But anyway, we'll deal with that as we go. But it's been now just about reducing that contact as much as possible. And there's bunches of strategies that universities are either using now or deeply considering for the fall. And then let me see, Megan, can you just tell me a little more about what? Yeah, as far as what your experience, it's hard to say, and that's why I want to choose what this is carefully. Like, I'm designing this to be part of a certificate or a master's degree in environmental education, so it'll fit with 2 or 3 other key courses in a way that makes them interlock well, but it also has to stand on its own. And so when I think about it standing on its own, I often think about, okay, when I went through my degree, it was hardcore marine biology. I didn't take anything but these hardcore natural science courses, and I didn't learn squat about how to teach. But I almost immediately, well, I actually was teaching from like the time I was a teenager, because I lifeguarded and pushed my way and taught swimming lessons to make my way through. So I often had wished shortly after I graduated that I had taken something about pedagogy, because it would have made me more effective earlier. And so I think about this particular course in that context. Let's say you're a marine science student and you're getting, or you just recently got a degree in marine science or something like that. This course on its own should be able to make you a more effective teacher immediately and set you up to become a more effective teacher as you go as well. So that's kind of how I'm conceptualizing it. Yes, it fits into the certificate. Yes, it fits into the master's degree in environmental education, but it could also be taken by somebody with a science background who just wanted to learn not the basics, but some well-earned wisdom and knowledge on how to teach marine science from, some of the best people that are doing it. Sorry, I have to skim down through there. Teaching marine science to a group that actively disagrees with concepts and facts due to their beliefs. Yeah, and we all deal with this in science education when it comes time for evolution or climate change. And I always say that this is where you get into connecting with your learners, right? You need to understand your learners well, what motivates them, what their obstacles might be to learning the material and all that kind of thing. And so if you understand your learners better and where they're coming from, it can help with this kind of stuff, but there's no magic wand. It can be, often what you're doing is asking someone to not just learn a concept, but completely change their worldview. Because if they put that concept in their head and make it work, it's got to completely change a whole bunch of other stuff that they're not comfortable changing at all. And so you're not going to be able to do that in an afternoon or a course or a weekend or something like that for most people. You're just going to have to come up with the most effective way that you can to move them a little further along. And that's a big challenge. There's quite a bit of education research showing that teaching that controversial stuff is actually pretty engaging for a lot of students, right? And teenagers, that kind of stuff. So I'm not saying avoid it or anything like that. I'm just saying if you go at it full throttle, you often just end up alienating or shutting down people. It really does take finesse and good skills managing groups and emotions and all that kind of stuff. There's no magic wand. Any others?
So with that group management, I've had field trips and groups come through where the teachers specifically say, you can't talk about blankety blankety blank, specifically things like evolution. What would be your advice or your tips for dealing with a group like that? You obviously want to, I work at Loggerhead, we're a hospital, we're a scientific facility, but we have such a wide audience.
Right. My first response would be unless you are your own company, like it's, Enya Teaching Incorporated or whatever, you have to set yourself and your lessons and all that in the context of your organization and its mission statements and all that kind of thing. So it's like, what are we trying to do here? Because this might be just your own personal soapbox or a real passion or whatever, and that's great. But it may, the way you deal with it may clash with your organization's, mission statement or something like that. So you really do have to kind of step back and say, okay, what are the ultimate goals here? What are we really trying to do? And then what should I be doing in the context of this? And that can sometimes give you some insight into, sort of like, this is not a hill I want to stand on here. I just want them to not throw plastic on the beach so turtles eat it or whatever. And you can choose those battles more carefully for sure. I get that it is difficult. And on that note, if science and science literacy is an important core part of your organization, you can just tell your boss, look, if they're telling me this, tell them no. and see what your boss says, right? See what the organization, when people are signing up, they're signing up for science education. And so in that case, it's not you taking the stand, it's your mission statement, it's your organization, whatever. So
and that's
you can
definitely a
go
big
either.
thing with us and the volunteers
Yeah.
is communicating to the volunteers how to remove themselves from it. Like, okay, yes, this might be your beliefs, but as an organization, this is what
Right.
what we're
Yeah.
teaching.
And it's, you know, stepping back and looking at the greater context of what you're trying to do education wise and mission wise and all that. That's always a good idea when you're teaching. It's something you should be doing pretty regularly
I
anyway.
avoid
It just,
politics like the plague.
yes, it just comes to the focus when you get into policy stuff and some of the more controversial science stuff. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Will there be any component about delivering effective and engaging online learning? Well, that component is pretty hard to avoid right now, even if I'm not modeling it very well right now because this is new, but it's one of those things where, yeah, we can't avoid that, right? And because we're looking, you know, the latest I heard was virus mutating may become, you know, flu-like where you require, you know, it's changing education probably permanently. And so all of us who do pedagogy are very seriously thinking, yeah, we need to do more of this. We need to be more effective at this. And the good news is that, you know, many of Enya, for example, is a great example. Loggerhead's a great example. They're already doing really cool stuff with distance learning and all that. Many of the FMSEA members are already doing this stuff. And so we will definitely be building that kind of expertise in as well, because it's becoming more and more important. And it's runs against the grain of environmental ed, and it runs against the grain of experiential type ed. But it's also just welcome to, you know, 2020, and what can we do to be as effective as possible in the context that we're given. So that will always be part of it. As educators, especially again in science and environmental ed, you got to keep up, right? It's no good teaching what worked 20 years ago, because that may or may not be working now. So we have to be, that's that number 7 lifelong learner thing. You always have to keep up with the new stuff. Yes, politics and snowbirds don't mix too well, but I agree with that one there. Anyone else? I see a new face appeared, so any new questions? All right, well, we're almost at the hour. Katie, is that...
Yeah, we can wrap it up here.
Okay, as I always say, and as Enya will note, if you do have questions that you don't like to ask in front of your judgmental peers, feel free to email me or put them in that survey or that kind of stuff. This was meant to be more interactive, roundtable-y kind of stuff at, you know, while we were all getting nibbled on by sharks up in New Smyrna. So this is, I want you to use that survey as a way to communicate things, questions that you have, expertise that you have, wisdom that you have, all that kind of stuff. So by all means, please fill out the survey and I'll be happy to respond.
So that short link to the survey is active in the chat, so do feel free to fill that out. And just a couple housekeeping things before we wrap up. Just generally, thank you for presenting today. I think that was super interesting. If you do get the chance to go through the entire chat, you'll see some comments that people have said, and that PCK really stuck out to everybody. So that was,
yeah, really I'll save it for sure.
And for the people joining today, don't forget to renew your FMSEA membership. We know that many of you renew your membership when you attend the conference, and since it's the normal conference this year, your membership wasn't automatically renewed. So you can go to FMSEA.org to make sure you stay current. And if you enjoyed today's session, we hope you'll consider donating to FMSEA. Our annual conference is a really big source of funding for the organization. And unfortunately, we weren't able to recover all of the costs that we're putting into the in-person conference. We know this is a tough time for everyone, so thank you for allowing us to continue to put on events like this for wonderful marine science educators such as yourself. I am going to drop a link in the chat box for donations if anyone is interested. It's in there. And then last piece is, don't forget to join us at 4 p.m. today. Liza Fitzgerald is going to be doing a presentation on fishing and conservation to earn scholarships. So thank you all for joining us. I hope you enjoyed your time today, and thank you again, Bryan.
Thanks, everybody. It was fun.
Thanks, Dr. Nichols.
Mhm.
Thank you.